This is Fantasy Body Part 2, beginning the build. In Photoshop, I have my full design of the front, side, and back of my character. I will just be using the body, of course, but flushing out the head just to see what it looks like in full. I'm going to prepare it for the body model, so I don't need the head at this part, so I'm going to turn off the head and the mask that goes with the head. And if you had spent time doing this in your layers, it will make it quick and convenient. I just color coded all the head stuff blue and the mask stuff red, so I know that turns out quickly. So what I plan to do is bring in this front view, just like your hand. This is the front view of the character this time as an image plane in the front camera. And this one for the side view camera, and I will save this back view just in my reserve. In my Photoshop composition of layers here, I have a white background that just gives it foundation, clarity that I can turn off. When I turn it off, I have the checker box, meaning there's no pixels there. There's no pixels containing this. If you don't have it in your design, it is quite convenient. I'm going to show you something that's going to make the image planes even better and more visible. So when we do bring this into Maya as an image plane, anything that does not have pixels will be transparent if we save it as a file format that has a channel for transparency, which is a TIFF file, for example. Now, while Maya will not accept PSD files as image planes, it'll give you a grayed out, it won't let you choose one. It will accept layers if it's saved in the format of TIFF or other files that contain a fourth channel or an alpha channel, RGBA. A is for alpha. So you don't have to worry about all that. Just if we save it as a TIFF format, we know that these these gray and white squares will be transparent when we bring them in image planes, and it will be nice and clear to model by. That's the benefit of designing this all in Photoshop and not taking a photo directly in life with your hand, where it's harder to separate out the background. You could have done that, but it's an extra step. Here it comes automatic with the project as I built it. So let's go. The fastest way I found to do this is to just crop the image, save it as a TIFF, and then back up by undo on your keyboard. And if you can't go multi, hold Option Command Z to go multiple levels of undo. Let me show you what I mean. So I'm going to first cut out the front view and bring that into Maya. Now before I do that, I'll make one note. Notice I have these lines turned on. Remember I said you can draw your own lines? They're very convenient, if not useful, to have in the scene as well when you go to Maya to line them up, and you'll see in a bit. So I am going to turn on or leave on these lines in the image when I save it on each view. So starting with, again, the front view, I'm going to go for the whole, even the space with the head, because those lines will help me anticipate the space where the head will go. Something like that. And leaving enough room. Okay, double click, and then I'll save that as my front view. Okay, save that as the front view, not the side. So this is the front view. Now that it's saved, this is what I mean by undo. Just undo, to get back, if it takes a couple of steps, to that original image instead of having to reopen image and do it again. So just undo to get back. Now that you have the front view saved, go for the side view, choosing the absent space above the head too, just like that, and save it as side view. Do make sure you save it as a TIFF. It will have layers here because there are a lot of these layers. Most of them are hidden, and it will warn you that it will make the it will, well, this is the replace, but it will warn you before that the image layers that are not shown will make the file size bigger, and you can click OK. Into Maya, I'll start with the front view, the image plane little icon, click it, and I'll find, did this before, so the one I'm looking for I named front TIFF 3, and the TIFF file opens. We can look at it in the perspective view, and we can see how it's see-through. It'll be easy to navigate, model, and set up this way. Okay, let's get the other one. Going in the side view, image plane, and I named it side view TIFF 3. Okay, so those two come in nicely lined up because we didn't resize or change the size in Photoshop. All right, and they're nicely the size of the grid already. Remember when I talked about having the grid space be your design space, your modeling space. So a character should be roughly 20 to 30 units, grid units tall. This is, when it's finished, it will be that. So it's not bad in its current setup, its current size. But if you had your image planes much smaller, and let me just back up, if your image planes came in because you're designing really small, this small, and you started modeling that small under 2 or 3 grid units, that would cause problems down the road. So if that's the case, then you probably made them too small in Photoshop. The size of my image in Photoshop individualistically is about 1800 high, 714. That's more than enough. But if you had very small dimensions, like 200 or 300 pixels, that would not be enough detail. You would have to res up. So make sure when you make that first image and you have that full layout, it's quite a large image that you're designing in space in, probably around 2000 pixels wide at least. Then coming back into Photoshop, you should have an image that's roughly size of the grid. You could size it up, or you might have to go in Photoshop and res up, because that will be an important fix that will affect every other stage and step in the development. I'm going to arrange my image planes similar to the hand, where I have one in the south edge of the grid and this one boxing it in. Now I want, in this case, tail to tail. It's similar to having your thumb, 2 image planes and your thumb touching each other. This one I need to orient a little differently, like this, so I have the correct modeling space. It's no problem. You don't have to do it in Photoshop. You could just rotate it right here and, put it in the channel box if you need. Enter the correct dimensions, in this case 270, or I'd put 90 or negative 90, whatever the rotation total would be to get flat in that plane. Okay, next we're going to make sure these lines that we carried over from Photoshop, they line up. Because if they line up, everything else lines up. And you'd think they would naturally, bring them the same size, but perhaps not. I want to also model feet at the dark bottom of the grid, that line. I don't want to start modeling below. It's not a good habit. Like here and here. And at that point, you're trying to make them line up as good as possible. And if they look a little bit off, what you can do here is hit, I'm choosing one plane, this is the front view, I'm choosing the home key, and I'm moving the center down to that first gray line. Okay, right there. As close as possible to that gray line. Then hit home key again, and I can scale it hitting the R. Let's start on the first gray line. You see how it's a little bit off here. I know it seems nitpicky, but it does make a big difference when you're going to model from the front to the side. Now, pivots down there, I'm going to scale up until it nicely matches everyone else. And that is why I included those lines in space as well, not just to anticipate the head, but to line up those as good as possible. And something like that looks pretty good. Okay, let's give that a little spin around to see what our modeling space now will look like. And let's take a look in the 4 views. Okay, great. It looks all prepared for modeling. Here's a little bit closer view in the front. Now, in this modeling method that we'll use for the body, we're going to model everything we see here, except for the hands. We're going to attach them Frankenstein style. Talk about it a bit later, how that surgery is going to be happening. But a new method we're going to try here is modeling in halves or symmetry. So for the hand project, the hand is not individually symmetrical. Your right and left hand are mirror symmetries of each other, much like the extremities and limbs of the body are all symmetrical from each other, but on a bilateral plane, like a mirror. Those features toward the center of the byline division are separatable by a plane, and therefore they can be modeled as symmetrical objects. That's just a longer way of saying that you don't have to model twice. If you have a face or you have a body, it falls through the center line of division, so therefore you just have to model half and then copy the other half to create the other side of it. It's a much easier method. And you could say, yeah, you could just model the hand and duplicate it, but it goes even faster because you can anticipate one side from the other. So anything that we can model in symmetry, we will, and that will be the progress and process for CG modeling. So if we're going to model this body, only half of it, and then worry about the rest automatically, we should have this dark line of the grid go dead center as much as we possibly can through the design. So right now it's not quite dead center. Don't look at that jersey, which is a little bit off. Look at the design of this and best put that right in the center. So visually make sure you can anticipate where you feel the center of the body is, even if though it's imperfect in the illustration or artwork. Just try to decide where that compromise line is to best separate the image, because that's how it's going to be modeled, only in half. So I could do something like that where it works really well here, but not so well here. It's okay, and we don't need to be perfectly scientific about it. Just have a best compromise solution of where that line should go. Just giving a test to see if the right material is going to fit in here. I just got to test a very simple polysphere. Doesn't need to be that dense. I'm not going to model it with a sphere, of course. This is just giving a test to see if I've got the modeling space right. Before you start modeling, maybe make sure that you've got your image planes correctly placed, and in that way you should be able to see. This will be where you're modeling, where that sphere is, taking up that empty space. And if you look in the front view, you should be able to model and see well your mesh there. And when you look at the side view, equally you should see the mesh there. If the plane occludes, that means covering up where you're modeling. It means you have to shift the image planes around or flip them until it does work. Before you start to commit to modeling, make sure you're all set up to do so. Okay, I'm going to end it there and continuing in the next video of actually setting up a symmetrical modeling situation in the front view. All right, we're going to dim these down a little bit, similar to the way we did the hands before we built them. I'm going to open the attribute editor and select a plane. And before I change the color gain and the color offset, That's one way to give it some dim downness or darkness, or however you want to better see it. But you equally could go, let me just undo, and change the alpha gain to each one of the planes. If I set it on, let's say, 0.5, again, selecting the image plane and going into the image plane attributes, putting the alpha gain to 0.5. It's another way to dim it down and also make it transparent. Depends on your visual style or preference, making the also transparent geometry as you model it. It may be too cluttering for your eyes. For that way, it's just giving you options. You can use either or. While of course I'm doing this demo, it's not going to be any sort of step-by-step because your design is completely different. And I shouldn't want you to follow this step-by-step. This is more watchable than a step tutorial. I hope it answers some questions though, and give you valuable suggestions of how you're going to approach yours. When I look in my grid space, the width seems okay. I want the unit space on the grid represented by the character size to be about 20 to 30, as I mentioned a couple times before. Looking in the front view though, it seems a little bit short, but I am accounting for the whole head to be there. So the body is only about 16 grid units high, but if you include the massive head he has, it's about 25 units high. So for the body, it seems a little bit small to me. I'm going to increase the size a little bit more. So perhaps the body itself is already 25 units high. You can see the size of the grid units are kind of chunky here. Okay, I made that a lot bigger. Just make sure if you make any modifications, you line up those gray lines again or whatever color lines you made. Then any modifications, make sure you move where these dark lines of the grid are serving the bilateral division. That should go right through the center as much as possible, like that. Okay, now when I look in the front view, to my eyes and experience, that looks much better. Now we have a body that has a nice spread of units, about 25 high. So how you start building the half, I'm going to start with the right half, is up to you. Some of you might have used a box. You would have to delete the UVs on the box if you're going to UV it later, but you could start with a box, or you can start with create polygon, which is what I'm going to use once again. So drawing one polygon at a time and then subdividing those or dividing those with the edge loop tool and extruding edges. Just a few tools to get you a world of construction. So I have under mesh tools, create polygon tool. I also put it on my shelf, so I need only go there and click. Now I'm going to draw just the torso part. I'm going to start here, and if I hold X, it's going to snap to grid in the middle. My next point will be there. Next point there. Next point like that. And then I'll hit Y. Turns black because of the normals. You can reverse the normals to get that surface to look gray. Just select it and mesh display reverse. I'm going to start just dividing that. Let's get a better view in X-ray. Now I'm building half again, so this line right here at the edge is going to stay rather straight. I'm going to look for the major body lines and try to go with the flow of what their features are already there. So right here, the line is going to represent somewhere here of the navel, or above the navel actually, and I'll bring the point down here. I'll have another line right about here, predicting where the arm would emerge. And all right, very simple. I have three basic, turn off the grid, three basic polygon squares or quads. I should go no further, but look in the side view and line that up, or see how it lines up with my side view. And I'm going to rotate this. Oh, a simple new tool you might not have used is center pivot. You see, if I rotate this here, it's not rotating according to its local pivot. If you go modify center pivot, you probably won't have to use that all that much. But anyway, now the object will rotate according to its own pivot, its own mathematical local center. So again, that's in modify center pivot. I should have also put those image planes on a layer and lock that because I don't want to keep choosing that. So I put it on an R for reference layer. Now I'm not accidentally choosing it and focusing on my polygon. Adding another line here, concentrating mostly on the front view, not using the perspective really at all, and not really touching these CVs, which have to remain straight and perfect at the line of symmetry. I do a little bit in the front view, check the side view, a little bit more, and if that looks okay, continue slowly adding lines, edges into the front view, rarely using the perspective, if only to check the overall shape. And that is going to be the best procedure to not waste a lot of time pushing and pulling things out of place and distorting. The edges placed to anticipate the flow of all the geometry, all the features that are going to be matched to the geometry. So early on, the lines are flowing with the natural lines in the artwork or in the flowing lines in the creature. Checking the side view. All right, this has to come out, obviously. It's time to start extruding. Probably fix this. It's time to start extruding the edges of this. This, by the way, should probably come to about there at the top, not all the way back yet. We're going to extrude the edges to go all the way back. But, yep, let's start extruding this edge backward. And a little bit out. Then we can put this rounded like that, building in a start of roundness here. Now you might be thinking you could use a sphere for this. A sphere would have poles. Well, you can use a cube for this. Yes, a cube would be all quad, and that's a totally acceptable workflow and very efficient. I'm just happy to use this method. You can use whatever you want. If you find another tutorial that gives you a better start, use whatever works for you. This is just a suggestion, these tutorials. Looking in the side view, and that really got way too pulled back. We'll be doing something like that. I'm going to be building the jersey into it, so that line is very important to me right now. It's a good time to save your work. This whole time I'm working in one mode. I don't even care about 3. This is telling me exactly where each CV is, each edge lies, in a more point-to-point direct explanation of its topology. All right, I can't really do much more with that. I'm going to insert a line in the center, or not the center, but right here. Have my split edge ring tool. Only when you can't do any more with it in modification, and only then add more detail to it. Otherwise, you can waste just hours pushing and pulling edges and never satisfying yourself to its shape or its form. all has to do with building only a little bit at a time and adjusting as you go, at least in this particular technique. Okay, maybe it's time to add an edge right there. Okay, it's probably time to add that edge right there. Stomach is going to pooch out like that. And this is the first time I'm hitting 3 to see what that looks like so far. Just as a beginning of a torso, kind of a peanut shape. Very efficient, not too many quads to make the surface. No reason I have to go into many more lines or details here. Just keep building backward and out. Selected all those edges and I'm going to extrude. Selecting and going to extrude more like that. And just with that, spend time massaging those edges into the new places they should be without doing more. If those eventually have to be on the edge, I have a tool to put them perfectly on a line, which I can show you later. Let's not worry about it now. Fixing in the side view. This shouldn't be all the way around the figure yet. Aiming for a balanced shape in these squares, so there's not a lot of stretching like that. This would be, too far. This would be too close. Just looking for an equilibrium to the sides of the grid as it falls over the organic form of the shape. And of course, it's not going to be perfect as it was drawn or created in Photoshop, the front and side view. So you're going to have to make creative compromises between what it represents. I think it needs to pooch out a little more as a belly to pillow out more. So this is going to follow more the front view and the side view. Unless I spent like a long time illustrating that perfectly as a lining up. So it's going to line up as well as you can. I'm going to look for features to follow that edge of the jersey especially. A little modeling music would be nice about now. Again, the edges following the features that pick up that I want to flow around, that I notice, I'm not worried about this hole right here. I'm going to add it later, and this hole coming out for the jersey for the head, I'm going to add that later. I'm just going to model over it, kind of pave over it with the polygons and include that later. Continuing to extrude backward until we reach a few more total rings to complete the back. Extrude. Building the back of it, turning off the image plane so I can see this whole. I'm just going to extrude these two and connect them. Whatever strategy works for you. I'm just kind of going fast and improvising. Connecting these by merging them better together. Then multi-cut tool. Sorry, this is the insert edge loop tool. You don't have to use multi-cut. And merging here. If I got off center here, teach you a real simple trick to put everything on a line again. Just select all the CVs that are supposed to be on the left mirrored edge. You can use this lasso select tool if it helps. like that. So if you move this, it all moves unevenly. It moves the same with equal unevenness to distance. But if you go into the Move tool, double click on the Move tool, it gives you some options you can change. So the submenu here says Move Snap Settings. It says Retain Component Spacing. If you turn that off, then hit X as you move. I'm going to turn on the grid so you can see that dividing line. Hitting X as you move, it puts it on one straight line. That had to do again with the tool setting and Move having been set on Retain Component Spacing off when it's usually on. You'll probably have to do that trick a number of times before you mirror it over, because it has to be nice and mirrored on one straight line, and things can get knocked out of center or something like that. Okay, this is the shape so far in the perspective, and it's rather boxy. It will look boxy when you first develop in the side and the front views. And it has a healthy amount of lines here that are some not well placed, so it's a good chance to do the Sculpt Smooth tool, which I showed you on the hands. It's up here in Mesh Tools, and you select Sculpting Tools. You can tear off that menu and use Smooth. Remember using the M for the strength and B for the size of the brush. Make sure not to touch this edge or you're going to have to realign it again. This is where, let's turn off those image planes. This is where you can do some smoothing or relaxing. To get out some of the lumpiness of it. And then check in the other views. Again, if anything gets out of symmetrical line perfection, let's go and select, lasso select everything. Make sure again your Move tool is set, that one is set for Retain Component Spacing off, and then hold X to snap them to the center line. Now I'm using more and more the 3 to see the smooth version of it. I'm trying to make this as clean as possible with the edge flow, looking in the front view, having those lines follow the natural features as I mentioned before, and looking pretty good front to back with the see-through mesh lineup. That is, if I'm seeing the back side of the mesh and the front side at the same time, they should have some visual alignment so as to be pretty easy to tweak and manage and modify locations of the CVs, and also we'll be making everything easier with texture maps and rigging if that's what you do later. Okay, maybe it's about time to anticipate how the arms, neck, and jersey and all the lines and contours that are going to come across, they may need extra extrusions, and so here's what I would do. Let's first find the area that would probably be this opening of the side of the jersey, which is much larger than the arm, but where the arm comes out from. Find how it actually lays out in the side view. Maybe you could massage it around a bit, but it seems like this area right here. So next what I would do is extrude that massive 6 faces and keep them together and punch them inward. Oops, just got a double extrusion there. Just extrude once and punch them in a little bit. So that will be the area for the rim of the jersey on the side. Arms extends, maintaining all quads, of course, still. It would be again optional if you'd want to do another ridge to get more detail here. It could easily just as easily be simulated by a bump map from a distance or some other type of map like a normal map, but if we do want to go a little bit more, we could punch inward with this to get more of a lip on the edge. I don't think that's going to be necessary because we're going to have the ridge of the painted color map here to define that pretty well, but that part could be optional. It's not adding too many more edges and faces and CVs to it, so it depends on the economy that you have in modeling. So I suppose on mine I might just leave it. Might be a little bit overkill, but it will hold up to a rather medium close-up. And always good to check between 1 and 2 to see how far out you're exaggerated it's getting. Well, this is getting really stretched, so we have to be careful. Well, this isn't changing too much. Again, about 5 to 10% difference is acceptable if it's stretching too much, indicating you need more edges. For the ridge here at the bottom of the jersey, I'm just going to insert another edge loop along a contour edge and exaggerate that by cinching it a little bit to give the illusion of it poking out a little bit. So right here, just wouldn't harm to put one extra edge loop right there. So we see it here and can grab, just hit the right arrow to grab that whole loop and bring it in a little bit, bring this down a little bit. Another way you could have done it is to extrude all the faces all around here and extrude them all like a vest. Would be an equally effective way to do it. There's no absolutely right or wrong way, as long as it gives you a good topology and it's quick and it's whatever method you prefer. We could even overlap this a bit, but you have to keep watch of how much you're stretching the geometry, which will make it harder to paint on when you're in UV and make those shells. So we should check back with 1 and really see how much you see they're getting really exaggerated and stretched. That would make them very difficult to unfold in the UV, so watch out for that. Do keep checking the views, the side views, to make sure everything's following contours. Okay, checking the front and side views. I turned off X-ray so I could see a little more sculpturally. Has more of a thickness with the 5 views, so you can really see what it's feeling like. At some point, the references aren't going to be too much of use that it moves into a very sculptural object. But I can hit 4 to see through it and see what's going on. So starting to get this look for it. And lastly, I'll prepare the edge of the neckline for the jersey, and before I smooth out everything and artistically polish it, and begin building out the arm after that. So for the neck, these would probably be the likely candidates of the faces to select. Do similar to this part of the jersey for the arm. Going to extrude it. And then for this part of the mesh, I don't need this, so I can probably delete that and just make sure everything's on a line later, as we did before. Okay, adding the neck. This is what I have so far. Needs a bit of smoothing and polishing, of course, but pretty near to working and attending to the other limbs and appendages. Arms coming next, and of course feet. Here's a wireframe on shaded view of what it's looking like.